Hey there, piano teachers. If we haven't met before, my name is Jana Williamson, and welcome to my home piano studio in the suburbs of Chicago. Last week's video talked about all the general concerns around teaching Bach's Invention No. 8 in F major. You, of course, know it. And today I'm going to highlight how I might introduce this piece to a student in their first lesson. And like I said, this might be a student's first two-part invention, so it might be their first introduction to the style, and I want to send them home ready to practice this and have a very good experience with it. So it's time for a student's first Bach invention. This is a big milestone in a piano student's life, and I make sure to tell my students that. I will oftentimes have them purchase a nice, expensive Henley Urtext score of this, which helps with that rite of passage thing. And with this one, I might offer them just this one as their first one. Say, I've picked out the one that's just perfect for you to start with. Or I might offer them both the C major and the F major and allow them to choose. I do different things with different students. If this is not a student's first invention, we might be listening to a few of the harder ones and choosing one from there. In fact, I just did that with a student this morning in her lesson. The first thing we would do would be to listen to a recording, or for me to demonstrate if I'm ready to play it really well at a professional level. After we listen, I always just have a general question for students like, what did you notice? What did you hear? Or what do you think the character of this piece is? Or was there anything that stood out to you as we listen? I like for them to be part of this conversation the entire time. And yes, this first lesson on a piece like this is going to have more talking than subsequent lessons once they can play. But that's okay in this instance. I do like to make sure in my lessons in general we are prioritizing playing the instrument a lot. There will be more talking in this particular moment because we are introducing a new piece. All right, so we've got an aural picture for what the piece is going to be like. We talk about how there are the two parts and that they both get to play important stuff. And the first important thing is called the subject. If they have any idea of what a subject is, if this is already part of their vocabulary, then I might ask them what they think the subject is. If this is a brand new idea for them, I will probably just tell them, in this piece, the subject is... And I say, it's right there in the right hand at the beginning. I'll probably have them play it right there so they can experience it as well. I won't worry about fingering or anything right at the very beginning. We'll just have that experience of playing that. And then we will take time to find all of the subsequent subjects throughout the piece. Most students don't catch all of them the first time, and sometimes I miss them too. It's just part of looking at a intricate piece of music. In this one, I know where they all are because I've taught it so many times. Then we will probably talk about what key each of them is in. Obviously, we start in F major at the beginning. When they find it in measure 12 and 13 in the right hand, we're in C major. When they find it in measure 16, obviously we're in G minor. And so I would probably have them play at least one hand in each of those keys and experience what that's like. They might stumble a little bit with that G minor scale coming down, so we might have to talk about that. Then we might also look at what some of the fragments of the subject are, or talk about how, because they might be looking at something and find something they say, oh, that's the subject, and I'll say, well, sort of, but not quite. And we can talk about how we get these broken eighth note patterns, such as I just played measure 8, or anywhere else that might not quite be the subject. We might also look at how Bach turns it upside down with those fragments in the second half of the piece. So for instance, measure 21, and then he does it again, sequence down. Basically, I just want them to have their eyes open to what is the main material and how did Bach start to use it? Where did he put it? Did he turn it upside down? What key is it in? Those kinds of questions. I don't expect them to theoretically analyze it perfectly in the first look. I'm helping them, guiding them to see what Bach has done. All right, then we're going to dive into actually trying to play the subject with really good fingering. We're going to talk about fingering, what's marked in their book. Does that work? Can they do the little contractions of the 1, 4, 1, 4, or in the left hand, 4, 1, 2, if we're going to use that fingering. and we would go through each of the subjects, looking at the fingering and practicing it. That actually is like my main thing for the week. I really want them to understand the subject and to be aware that they need to use good, consistent fingering on a piece like this. Then, before I send them home with a practice assignment, we're going to look at where the big sections are. In my mind, this piece pretty equally splits into 3 large sections. The first one is measure 1 to 11, or the downbeat of 12. The second one is from the downbeat of 12 to about measure 25. And then the last one is from 26 to the end. You could certainly argue with me about where you want to put that third section, but that's what I've outlined with my students most of the time. And then each of those sections can be broken up further into smaller chunks. The first section very neatly breaks up into 4-bar phrases, measure 1 to 4, measure 5 to 8, and then the last 3 bars ending on measure 12 with the C major downbeat. I will put up on the screen here the rest of my sections. I think section 2A is measure 12 to 15. 2B is actually 5 measures because I want to finish all this stuff. And then when he starts doing that the subject upside down, I see that as the final part of section 2. And then 3, I split into measure 26 to 30, and the last 4 bars are the 3B. So 3A and 3B there. Those sections are small enough to actually be practice sections, to rehearse either hands separately or hands together, 4 or 5 bars, and do multiple repetitions. I really don't want a student going home and playing this from start to finish. It's far too intricate and long and has far too much fingering for them to just start at the beginning and plow through to the end. They will get there. We'll eventually do that, but I really want them to think in the larger sections or the smaller practice chunks. Then I might have a discussion with my student about how much they think they can actually do in 1 week. And this is the point at which it's going to become very personal to which student you have in your lesson. If you have a very busy teenager, I'm not going to assign the whole thing to them. I'm going to break it down. If you have a highly motivated student who's a good reader and a quick learner, then I will assign the whole piece hands separately. Most repertoire I do not send home with a lot of hand separate practice, but that is different for contrapuntal music. So for a good student who's a good reader, who I know will practice, I will send them likely home with this whole piece hand separate, and then give them a tiny little bit to experience hands together. It might just be those first 4 bars. I don't want them doing a ton of hands together practice in the initial stages because of 2 reasons. First, I might have to rehabilitate a lot of very difficult things when they come back. And secondly, there's just a lot of fingering to put into play. So I'm going to give them the goal of really consistent fingering, lots of repetition on small chunks, being able to come in and show me that they've got those 2 individual voices really solidly learned, prepared to play for me with that consistent fingering. That's not the only way to introduce this piece, or another invention for that matter. That's just what I might do and usually would do with something like this. I'd love to hear from you. Do you have different ways of introducing contrapuntal music in particular? Do you have favorite things you do when introducing intermediate repertoire in general? Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Check out the Bach Leveler, which is in the description of this video, and best wishes in your teaching and playing.